I hope you all have your lunch bags with you so you can enjoy your lunch while you watch some films with us together today. Welcome to the first lunch session for the WHO's Health for All Film Festival lunch screenings. Today's theme is climate change and health. So here's the plan of action today. I'll introduce myself first. Hi, I'm Megan Milota. I work at the University Medical Center Utrecht. I'm a teacher, a researcher, and a filmmaker, and I'll be your moderator for today, tomorrow, and Thursday. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers first, so that you know who's on our panel actually today and who we'll be talking with after the films. And then we'll have a short introduction to the Health for All Film Festival, what it means, what the goals are, and our aims and purposes. And then we'll screen all 3 films. So we've got 3 short films for you today. We'll introduce those in just a minute. But first, our guest speakers, our panelists, who will be talking with us today about the films. Online, after the films are done screening, you'll see Dr. Santino Severoni. He'll be joining us from Switzerland. He's the WHO's Director for Migrants' Health. Second,
nice
we have Amrish Baidjoe. He was speaking here in the session just beforehand, so I believe he's getting some lunch right now. And he's the director of MSF Luxembourg for Médecins, Frontières. Next, we have Francesca Racioppi. She's backstage right now getting mic'd up, so she'll be joining us in a minute too. And she's the WHO's head of office for European Center for the Environment and Health. Next, we have Jürg Uttzinger. Amrish, welcome. Director of Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institutes. And last, Gilles Reboux. Gilles is the head of this whole Health for All Film Festival. So I'd like to give the word over to Gilles to talk to us a little bit more about the festival and the films that we'll be seeing.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. And I want to thank you and Joyce Brown, who have made these lunchtime sessions possible for the WHO's Health for All Film Festival to be introduced to you during this conference. So I didn't follow what you said just before. I think today we have climate change and health. Tomorrow, SRHR, the sexual and reproductive health, and on Thursday, the mental health. In fact, the Health for All Film Festival, just to give you a bit of background, it's a proposal that I made to WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros, in 2019, and he approved the concept, and I'm going to explain to you in a couple of minutes. And we started the first edition in 2020 with 1,300 submissions from 110 countries. So it has been, since the beginning, a great success. And Dr. Tedros decided after the first edition that WHO should sustain this project on a yearly basis. So we have now the call for films, which was launched on 1st November and will close on 31 January. And it's open to all institutions, to all NGOs. I want to insist on the concept of a festival that the films made by United Nations agencies are not eligible. So it's really for the champions of health in any country, whether they are health workers, part of NGOs or public institutions, as well universities. We have a special prize for students, so students can also participate, and individuals, any individual can participate. Based on, this is an excerpt from the website. You can scan the QR code here to see the full website of the festival. Films are a powerful way to raise awareness, improve understanding, and encourage positive behavior change. So that's the main summary of the concept. And that's why we call for activists around the world to submit their stories on health and to have a diversity of types of films and diversity of topics to be mentioned, to be selected every year. The 5th call for films, so as I said, is open. The call for films is open right now. Every year we have 3 main categories that you can see here on this intro part of the website. And in fact, when we say health for all, I think during COVID, everybody has understood that health for all is a multi-sectoral concern. I mean, we saw through COVID that transportation was affected, the workplaces, the business was affected, the education, the schools, and so on. So health for all is really not only for the health sector to take that in charge. And for WHO, it's with these three main categories of a festival are aligned to the major public health goals that WHO promote in the general program of work of the institution at the moment, which is universal health coverage, health emergencies, and better health and well-being. And just a small parenthesis, the first edition we had a category on animation film, another category video reports, and Dr. Tedros said after the first edition we should align to our major public health goals and not to the types of films, because storytelling about health could take any form, and that's what we want to look in this festival. Every year we have a special focus, so you're going to see this session is about climate change and health. That was a special focus of 23, and sexual and reproductive health tomorrow was also a special focus in 23. Next edition in 24, we have physical activity and health, and migrants and refugees health, special film prize. That's why Dr. Severoni is with us today as the director of migrant and refugee health in WHO, and we are going to see with our panelists the link to climate change, migration and climate change. Student film prize I already mentioned to you. Very short film prize, just for you to know. The festival is dedicated to films from 3 to 8 minutes. All the main categories I mentioned are 3 to 8 minutes, but we accept films from 1 to 3 minutes in the very short film prize. One goal we have is films for health impact, how we can make behavior change through film. And this is another page of the website. I invite you to visit more. We have started to create educational tools based on the film selected, and today is kind of session which is recorded that we can add in this page as with inputs from our panelists to see how these films today could be used for educational purpose and health promotion. And you can see different links that WHO is developing different approaches about communicating for health impact, behavioral science unit, which was approved this year in the World Health Assembly of WHO, and so on. I'm not too far in the time, maybe. So the 3 films we're going to see now, and we have a discussion afterwards. So we see the 3 films in a row. Gen Z Mental Health, Climate Stories, a film from USA, which you will see there are different styles of films. The 3 films will show different types of production, so that's interesting also in terms of how we can tell stories. The Speech of Chai Suri is an animation film made by students in Brazil. And Mapping Survival is a documentary by Nacho Corbella from USA as well. Nacho was also a winner last year, and he had this film selected this year for the climate change and health category. So,
with no further ado, enjoy the screenings.
So last year, the UN described the current climate crisis as a code red for humanity. I'm really concerned about the future of the children being born today, essentially. And on a selfish level, I would like to have children, but with what I see at the moment, I'm not super sure it's a great idea.
I've always wanted to be a mom, and I feel like my desire or want to be a mother is being slowly ripped away from me the older I get, so that's really upsetting.
I can't morally justify raising a child in a planet that's literally on fire.
My generation will not get to grow old or enjoy the different stages and experiences that life has to offer.
Things that are predictable and have been predictable for a very long time are being ignored. So just not having a future in general is a pretty scary idea to grasp at 17.
Is there going to be a natural disaster that devastates my home? Are we going to have food shortages? Will I get left behind? Will my family get left behind?
My biggest fear related to climate change is that we are actually on track to lose it all.
I feel like I constantly see on the news about unprecedented fires and floods and hurricanes, and I think about how people aren't going to be affected by these things equally.
I live in Austin, Texas, so right now we're seeing triple digits, and it keeps getting hotter in Texas from the last 2 years I've lived here. It's becoming more unbearable for folks to be living in this part of the region and seeing how that's going to affect us in the future and what we can do now to stop that.
Some people think of Iraq as just a desert, but it's much more than that. We have a beautiful nature and scenery distinctive to each region within the country. It would be devastating to see all that just get ruined with climate change.
Some of these experiences seem like they are far from us, but seeing people struggling to get water, as a person who has lived with water scarcity or water shortages for quite a long time, it's frustrating.
In BC, we have seen the impacts of climate change firsthand, from forest fires and wildfire smoke everywhere, to extreme cold and extreme heat that is so uncharacteristic. So we need to be sure that when we're talking about climate change, we're not talking about concerns for the future and solely anxieties for the future. People have legitimate fears, concerns, anxieties today.
My biggest fear in the future as it relates to climate change surrounds the lack of prioritization for the needs of disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income communities.
I think my biggest fear would be people will continue fighting against each other and finding things to fear instead of focusing how we can work together and create solutions and think positively and help each other.
I have a few things that cause me fear when it comes to the climate change. First, in governments actually listening to their citizens to take substantial climate action, but also having them help other countries who deserve climate reparations and are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis right now.
I often feel like every single thing that I do has to somehow relate to solving this issue. And it's kind of taken over my life.
It's sort of like picking at me, almost like taunting me a little bit. If you don't do this, then the world's gonna end or something like that.
And so there was this one moment, I was on an expedition with 200 people from around the world. One moment when all 200 people went silent at an ice fjord, and we could literally hear icebergs melting. So think of that for a second. Millions of drops of the purest water on the planet falling into the freshest body of water that exists. But what I used in that moment was the connection with community.
What revives me emotionally is seeing others act as a community, advocating for action.
The thing that helps me to feel more resilient is by kind of leaning into engaging this area.
All of us are connected. We don't need to take more for ourselves than anyone else. We have to change society and we have to do something different.
I find that I am most fulfilled when I am serving others and advocating for communities who have not been granted resources and a visible platform to discuss their ideas.
Having those communities, those networks of support has been the ultimate form of resilience building, emotionally and mentally for me, and being able to also take what I've learned in my experiences and share them with other people.
That's really what being human is all about, and we're all going through this together. Climate change is happening to everyone, so being able to talk to others about it, really that's what I think we all need right now.
People in communities already know what their problems are and what solutions they need. So kind of like, giving people the confidence and power to solve their own problems. I think that's what, also fosters emotional resilience for people and communities. And I think that's what I would really need at the moment, honestly. Yeah, that's what I would need.
Creating hope for myself and really involving myself in the climate movement in a way that's celebrating my heritage and the plethora of sustainability practices that are in a lot of our ancestral knowledge. I think that's something that I kind of took in terms of the way I wanted to affect the sustainability space. And this really gave me a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose when it came to the climate movement.
Taking action is our only option that we have to save this planet. And I think that the younger generation, including myself, can take the lead on this relevant initiative. We can speak up and we can contribute much more than we can imagine.
Really, what I need now is not a quick fix. I need my government to recognize my rights, and I need my government to recognize the rights of the people I love and the people I've never met.
Seeing how we can come together to provide a better future for one another through that community, through that, groups and events that we can do to bring action in not just a local level here in Austin, but on a more global scale as well.
We need to be able to imagine new futures. We need to be able to imagine futures and reimagine ways that we can exist and be in this world beyond the American dream, beyond the confines that already exist.
It actually feels like I am being a part of saving the planet, and that really makes a person happy, and that's what makes me happy.
Meu nome é Chai Suruí. Eu tenho só 24, mas meu povo vive há pelo menos 6.000 anos na floresta amazônica. Meu pai, o grande cacique Amrish Baidjoe, me ensinou que devemos ouvir as estrelas, a lua, o vento, os animais e as árvores. Hoje o clima está esquentando, os animais estão desaparecendo, os rios estão morrendo, nossas plantações não florescem como antes. A terra está falando, ela nos diz que não temos mais tempo. Uma companheira disse: vamos continuar pensando que com pomadas e analgésicos, os golpes de hoje se resolvem, embora saibamos que amanhã a ferida será maior e mais profunda? Precisamos tomar outro caminho, com mudanças corajosas e globais. Não é em 2030 ou em 2050. É agora. Enquanto vocês estão fechando os olhos para a realidade, o guardião da floresta, Ariuruewawau, meu amigo de infância, foi assassinado por proteger a natureza. Os povos indígenas estão na linha de frente da emergência climática. Por isso devemos estar no centro das decisões que acontecem aqui. Nós temos ideias para adiar o fim do mundo. Vamos frear as emissões de promessas mentirosas e irresponsáveis. Vamos acabar com a poluição das palavras vazias. E vamos lutar por um futuro e um presente habitáveis. É necessário sempre acreditar que o sonho é possível. Que a nossa utopia seja um futuro na Terra. Obrigada.
Chad as country, it's a very vulnerable place. We are the door of the desert. Climate change impacts more indigenous peoples than other communities because their life depends from the environment. The brook is our supermarket, it's our pharmacy, it's our energy. It is our water point. It's everything for us. And if this ecosystem is getting extended, that means our life is getting extended. So that's all the life of indigenous peoples everywhere in the world. Climate change already is a big drama in our life, but it's impacted more women and children because those are using the first resources. They have no other alternative for them life. Rande? Enggak buri min sembe min fu. Indigenous peoples are not vulnerable. We become vulnerable. We become a victim of the climate change. But we are not only a victim, we are solution peoples. Those traditional knowledge that we know from generations by living in harmony with the nature will be the world savior. Alaji hammani kawu kam to nde ummi pat don jodo to tema daga baba kawu fu nde ummi do. Our knowledge are oral. We transfer our knowledge through generation. So that's why for us, if one of our elder person passed away, it's the library that you cannot recover. So one of the solutions for me is using the 3D participatory mapping. It's to use the memory of our ancestors to get recovered.
Millions of people depend heavily on the natural resources of Lake Chad. Over the past 50 years, climate change has seriously impacted the region and the communities that depend upon it for water, leading to increasing conflict in the region. One solution? to bring pastoralists, farmers, and community members together to share ancestral knowledge and spatial information, as well as the challenges they face, in order to create a shared tool that considers the needs of all, a participatory, three-dimensional map. This inclusive process allows everyone's voice to be heard and fosters common goals based on cultural identity and the need for sustainable management.
Yowa o wi'ey ka non tan o dilla o wi'i on ka baadella to ɗon no jaren to min kam mi timmin Allah wallu kugal Allah wallu Allah wallu kugal Allah wallu Allah wallu to na
The nomadic pastoralists are the guardian of nature. For centuries, we live in harmony with Mother Earth. For us, we are all hiring this nature. We are not there forever. You can stay 100 years, but one day you will pass away, and you need to leave this land to another generation that are coming. That's why we are using these resources on a very equitable way. That's why we keep this lifestyle. It's who we are. So it's the time that they come and learn from our wisdom. The solution we can find it only when we can live with this nature.
I now would like to welcome to the lectern Miss Sundu Umaru Ibrahim from Chad.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is adding poverty to poverty every day. Migration is challenging for rich countries, but it's a tragedy for those who are left behind. We fight for survival. In Paris, you give us hope, but now it's time to change your hope into promise. Excellencies, if you do not increase finance for adaptation, soon there will be no one to adapt.
So, I guess that deserves a round of applause, doesn't it? Some powerful films, and I think that's a testament to the fact that film in itself is a wonderful and powerful medium for transmitting a message, having a potent theme that you can discuss with others, which is what we'll be doing now for the remaining portion of this talk today. So as I mentioned beforehand, we have some guest speakers. We also have a guest speaker available online. Hopefully that connection will be heading up here in a second so that we can see our participant online as well. I guess I'm going to start my question here to Jürg and Francesca. If you noticed in the first film that there was a lot of talk about Gen Z mental health and the impact of climate change on the mental health of our younger generations. So from your organizations and your institutions, what's your advice for how to help the younger generations of researchers and activists? How can you support them? There you go.
Thank you. Certainly, climate change in connection to mental health is one of the most rapidly emerging areas of concern. Mm-hmm. And it is very true that this is so much prominent, not only in the populations that have been directly traumatized by experiencing extreme weather events, but also particularly by the young generation, millions and millions of young people around the world. So there are several elements here. One is for the health community and for us to be able to understand this better, document, quantifying, make it visible and heard. But on the other side, there is the action side of it. Mm-hmm. And it is how can we support young people to, it would not be nice to say to adapt. Adapting means we are already surrendering to the fact that things cannot change. So somehow you have to learn how to survive. But how can we turn this into positive empowerment and in a way riding a civil movement that will deliver strong political support for change. I loved the movie because it was very much about expressing the concerns, but also expressing the sense that we can act upon that. Yeah. So organizations like us have a duty to give voice to this and a duty to support the empowerment of this movement.
Thank you.
Maybe to support one or the other element that you mentioned. I think what I liked with the first film was really to see and hear the voice of the youth. It was primarily youth people and first setting the stage, framing the issue, but then also trying to give some solutions of how this nexus of climate change and mental health could be broken. Us now from an institute where we do research, we of course would also like to have a bit stronger on the real evidence. What is the chain of the evidence that climate change then is a major driver of mental health? I think it is quite obvious, but nevertheless, a bit stronger evidence, and on that one, then to try to act, as you said, and to find solutions which are grounded in data, solutions that are setting specific, tailored to the needs of these young people, and that they can also drive and bring the elderly generation along.
Yeah. And how would one go about gathering evidence, or how do you approach that from your institution and the researchers that you lead?
Multiple ways. I think one would be through, let's say, surveys that you interview people. I think we heard it to some extent, but then not just individuals, but also communities, and to try to identify what are common threats from different settings, but again, not just stay there at the analytical part, but find solutions and how to transform it into actionable items.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a nice connection to Amrish, to your work and to your experience in interdisciplinary research projects. When you watch these movies, I was wondering whether or not you could link it at all to your research interests or to ideas or avenues that you think that we should pursue.
So I think in general, any crisis or the outlook of a crisis creates mental distress. That's why in our operational activities, you always will see that we have people that assist those affected. And I think that, when we speak about climate change, it's not just climate change, right? We could see in a post-peak pandemic period that many countries have suffered for multiple reasons. and a younger generation feels that the livelihood and the security around, especially in this part of the world, the social security that we had, future perspective is affected. Trust in the institutions that we so much need on a population level has never been this low. And I think that's also the perspective that, you know, we have to bring. Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff happening, but we still need to have solutions that are born also in a form of we can do this together and in a form of optimism. And I think it's especially for a younger generation, and I feel I'm passing myself that bridge from maybe younger generation to a bit of an older generation. I see that when I speak with students, and I didn't really see that before because my perception of climate change was really something that's already happening, something we're responding to, but they see the insecurities over the whole line of things, their financial insecurity, not being able to buy a house in the future potentially. And I think it's a huge responsibility, I think, for, you know, the generation of what I would say mentors in the broader sense of the world to help people to look, and younger people to look at, you know, what can we do together? That includes for me activism. I mean, that's not surprising, but you don't change things by having endless meetings and by making promises like all these movies testify to as well. Activism is not a dirty word. It's a push for change for good.
Yeah. And I think what was stressed in more than one of the films was the community forming that's part of activism, that actually speaking up together and working together to find solutions can also be a very empowering act of resistance, but also an act of change.
Absolutely, it's a necessity. Famous astronomer Carl Sagan said, like, help is not gonna come from anywhere else than here. It's the pale blue dot that we have. And in all of this, everybody in history has ever lived on this pale blue dot, and that's where we need to get that help and that push for change for. There is no other civilization that will come to rescue us from our own perils, to say so. Yeah. So indeed, and the research is very important. The session that we had before this with MSF is the open call for partnerships on this front, to unify scientific evidence, but also make sure that scientific evidence can be used as a fundament to push the narrative and the change we so much needed already decades ago, but definitely now.
Thank you. I can't see on our screens whether or not Santino Severoni is linked in with us. I'm going to pose this question to all of you, and I'll make it an open question, so whoever feels like they would like to answer it or put a first answer, let's say that way. This is a European conference, right? It's a European conference where we're looking at global and public health, and I guess it's centered, of course, in the Netherlands, the north of Europe. As you mentioned, or as was mentioned in multiple films, climate change is a real problem and it might lead to migration. It's already leading to migration. So how can the countries in Europe, there, thank you. Santino, you're available, hi.
I was following very carefully. I
was
following very carefully. It was an issue of imagine displaying.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're able to join us. So I'm going to rephrase my question. I'll pose it to you first and then open it all for responses then. So if we think about climate change and climate change-related migration as a current issue and a potentially greater issue in the near and distant future, how can countries, particular countries in Europe, better prepare for climate change-related migration?
Well, interestingly, replying a short form to your questions, especially in Europe, countries, they do know very well what needs to be done in order to be prepared. The question is if there is political commitment to do what is needed. And this is a bit of the story around migration overall, even the health aspect of population movement. Looking at the video, the movie, I really loved the part where the community was set under a tree with a computer. Really, everybody found their own collaborative, important role, and they found a solution. This is the founding principle also beyond managing migration and related issues to migration. But what we see today, it's a trend of managing migration individually as a member state, as a country, and with a very predominant focus on border management rather than people. The other element which I like across all three videos is that you brought up very loud, clear, and almost like a fist in the stomach, that behind very generic definition of vulnerability, migrants, refugees, they are people. And regardless where they are living, in which part of the world, they are sharing same feelings and same ambitions like all of us. And this is too often forgotten when we are addressing migration and health aspect of migration. Then in the specific of your question, what needs to be done? Well, there is a very important element of preparing for managing what is going to be, at least in the forecasting, in the data, the number we see in the simulation, a possible tsunami, a possible massive increase of movement. As we speak, we need to consider that 1 billion people are on the move. Those are refugees, displaced, international or internal migrants, trafficked people. So taking account all the groups, we are talking about 1 in 8 worldwide are people moving. The estimates of research institutions, they are forecasting that by 2050, we might be seeing 1.2 billion additionally on the move. So this clearly tells to countries that there are 2 options, or to be pragmatic and to start to act now, or to keep somehow ostrich style, ignoring the reality, but then we need to face the consequences, mostly as an emergency situation. So highly intensive, resource intensive, and with all the problem that the emergency management pose in facing a certain challenge. Key elements in analyzing the health systems of all member states, we produced just a couple of years ago the first global report on the health status of these populations. It appeared that access to health system and services remain the main problem because of the focus on border management, because of the focus on legal framework defining what is the level of entitlement and access to services. Chronic diseases, including mental health, are issues that are going to drain most of the health system's resources rather than communicable diseases, although we should not release the attention and the surveillance on infective diseases in the frame of massive population movement, because we see different geographic distributions related to climate changes and population movement. Many Southern European countries, they now deal routinely with chikungunya, for example, or imported tropical diseases because of population movement, and not only because of migration reasons. The element of chronic diseases and mental health is totally underestimated, also more complicated, more complex to be addressed when people are on the move, but the impact is certainly much higher because the status of migrant itself is an important determinant of health. So the experience of life, the exposure to risk factors, the change of living habits, and all the experience around the migratory phenomenon could be a very important trigger in terms of higher exposure to risk factors for chronic diseases. Before, colleagues, they were alluding to mental health. Mental health is extremely concerning, also because when people move, it's very difficult to offer services which are impactful, which are able to assist the health needs of this population. But we see actually very interesting, very concerning numbers, epidemiological numbers, even at the destination. For example, fact like depression symptoms tend to increase proportionally with the length of stay into the destination countries when the migrants, the refugees, is suffering disconnection from the social tissue, is suffering non-access to essential services, schooling, housing, not only health. So the social exclusion is combined with a migratory status can be a very powerful trigger for mental health disorders.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, it's very clear. We know very well, health sector knows very well what needs to be done. What we need a collegial political commitment to do the right thing. And the young guys in the movies, they say clearly, it's time to act now. We cannot continue to postpone or ignore.
Yep, thank you. And if I hear it right, it's not only thinking about solutions at the various countries where migration may be taking place, but also thinking about services here, long-term services, not only for chronic conditions, physical conditions, but also mental conditions. Thank you. We have 8 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and say I'd like to open the floor to the audience and maybe give the opportunity for them to ask some questions to you rather than keep going on this topic. So Bente in the yellow shirt there is available. She has some microphones that she will gladly throw to you very softly. If you have a question for our panelists here, I would like to offer you the opportunity to ask your question and engage in a dialogue with us. Yeah, right there in the front.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inputs. I would want to know, are there clear-cut mental disorders that we should be looking forward to regarding climate change? Indeed, we see the distress from the videos we've watched, how people are worried about it. But looking into the future, going for long-term consequences in terms of mental health disorders, should we be looking for new disorders to come, or these same ones that exist are going to be severe in nature? What are your thoughts on these?
Anybody like to take that? Okay, so long-term solutions, different kinds of solutions to mental health issues?
I am asking, would there be long-term new mental disorders associated with climate change?
Yeah. Yeah, long-term, other aspects related to climate change, long-term and
Mental health,
mental health issues.
New mental health disorders.
Yeah, we're getting feedback on the microphones. Yeah.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
So the question is about longer-term mental health disorders, right? Yeah. I suppose that this is, first of all, this is a field of research that, as we were saying, is rapidly evolving, because this is the first time that as a scientific community we are confronted with something like climate anxiety. So this is something where we are learning by doing, so there is evidence that that needs to be built up. But certainly, the fact that in a longer term, people are exposed to much greater instability and uncertainty is not giving you a positive perspective in a longer term, because these are conditions that by themselves go against a status of well-being and feeling, in control of your own present and future. So I think we have to cater for that, we have to learn and to prepare for that. And if you allow me a reflection on what Santino was saying before,
sure.
One of the unpalatable truth is that in the future, we need to cater for more migration, not less. Because climate migration is of a different nature. It's not something that you can alleviate with economic development programs in the countries from where, economic migrants are coming from. Because there are places that become uninhabitable. So there is a point in time where, while we have to try to restore nature, to restore the ecological conditions that allow the survival of human beings in their original context, we must also be prepared to the fact that for some people there will be no other options than moving. And this is something that to which we cannot be blinded. So we have to prepare for that and to, in a way, learn how to live and to make our societies ready to accept this development, certainly in the medium term.
Yeah. So not saying, okay, we're trying to prevent more migration accepting the fact that this is an inevitability. Yeah.
And maybe still on this element, I think one thing, and it was also to some extent shown in the film, what of course is really unfair. You have a relatively small proportion of people who contribute still most to the climate change. And holding them responsible for it, accountable for it, I think this is also where we really need a mechanism so that they also pay for what is happening. The example that you showed, people on the Pacific Islands, and soon there is no space anymore. We already see first movements that then some will be picked up in New Zealand, but the responsibility that the land becomes inhabitable or does not exist any longer, to a large extent, are others who cause the problem. And I think that's where we really need new mechanisms for holding accountable.
Would anybody like to venture on what these mechanisms would look like? I don't know if anybody feels compelled to offer some suggestions.
Well, you know, whatever mechanisms we use, they're all about accountability. We have maritime laws in Europe. Still, we do pushbacks. We have policies where people have to ask their apply for the first place in asylum, which in many countries, including the Netherlands, we've placed in the most unreachable place possible. So, you know, whatever new regulations we come up, whatever new ideas, as long as there are now accountability mechanisms, it doesn't work. It brings us back to what happened in the pandemic around equity of access, mechanisms like COVID that promised space and endless promises of equity. But in the end, if there's no accountability, nothing changes. And I think that is maybe the biggest part in it, right? It was already mentioned that, you know, the political narrative is complicated in this setting. There is, especially maybe with the ongoing waste complexities, but there's very clear breaches of existing laws that we draw up ourselves that are being breached in our own countries. And even those simple things we have difficulties with addressing. We have difficulties with putting accountability in place. So that places, unfortunately, a bit of a skeptic outlook in terms of how we're going to deal with a complex system-wide problem like climate change. Because in the end, the differentiation between is someone a climate refugee, or are they a political refugee, or are they a refugee that flees because of economical consequences? There's very big parallels between all of those three categories that can all be addressed by a climate event or a changing climate. And that's the political narrative that will be played to keep people out of the borders. Even with an aging population in Europe, where you could argue that we need young people to keep our economies going. So yeah, that's a complexity in itself.
Yeah, but it's also about local accountability, if I hear your answer correctly.
Yes.
Just looking at the existing regulations and norms that we have here.
Yeah, and I think it's also to us as public health professionals, both in the academic setting where we say, yes, we need to do more science to get more numbers. You know, there's also something like paralysis by analysis. That sometimes there is also an issue of just saying like, hey guys, this is not okay. Médecins Sans Frontières, we responded for the first time in Ter Apel in the Netherlands last year because people were sleeping outside in huge numbers in one of the richest countries in the world. And nothing was being done, and everybody was pointing fingers. And that's the point where you kind of have to take a stance and say, hey, this is unacceptable. And that by raising that, you put it in the spotlight. By putting things in the spotlight, you will force, to some extent, change, hopefully.
Yeah. Very quick response, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
More than a response is a reflection on what you have seen, what we have seen in these movies, because we are speaking a lot about the effect of migration and so on. But there are some very important positive messages that come from the two movies. The speech of the Sala, and the second one. And it is that we are not fully understanding and utilizing the huge wealth of knowledge which exists among the indigenous people who are closer to the nature and over thousands of years have developed adaptive strategies to live in harmony with the nature. There is a lot that we must learn again, because we have forgotten that from them. And I believe that this is one, we are starting now looking at nature-based solutions, but there is a lot that comes from, just to think, the traditional way of building can be naturally cooling the houses, for example. And we have lost this kind of knowledge and respect for this kind of knowledge and traditions. Yes. So as we are speaking of building stronger resilience in the communities, the so-called building forward better, not back better after the disaster, but in a way that is taking us a step forward compared to where we were, this is something that we need to be able to value. Yes. And it comes from that knowledge.
Yes. Thank you. That's a wonderful closing statement, and I think something to take with us in the upcoming days. So I'd like to close it off now, thanking again Dr. Santino Severoni for joining us, Amrish Baidjoe for joining us as well, Francesca Racioppi, Jürg Uttzinger, and of course, Gilles Reboux. We'll be here tomorrow and Thursday as well. Our themes will be talking about our sexual and reproductive health and rights. That will be tomorrow. And on Thursday, mental health. So I hope you'll join us again for the lunch sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.